Could you give us a brief introduction to your business and your family business?
Yes, the business was established in 1883 by my grandfather, and at that stage it was at 43 Montague Street, which is more or less opposite where British Home Stores are today. And then my grandfather split with his partner. He went into partnership with his brother-in-law, and they split, and my grandfather moved to where we are now at 148 Montague Street. And he acquired the next premises, 150, then 152, and expanded to where we are to now, where we occupy something like 3/5 of a block of that part of Montague Street.
I was just thinking, my grandfather was probably one of the first businesses in Worthing in about 1890. So when he had the steam school, in the steam, my father was born in the school, and he opened the steam school for boys. Yeah. Steam school for boys.
It was a Miss Bennett who ran it just before the First World War. Was that his daughter then?
No, his sister.
His sister?
That was my great aunt.
Because she died quite young, didn't she?
She did, yeah, she did.
And she was highly respected and much more.
Well, all the Victorian Bennett women were all, one was a matron of the London hospital, and they were all very fearsome women.
Yes.
One was a headmistress, they were not to be crossed. And although the third one, Hannah, devoted her life to my grandfather, and just looked after him all his life. And he was married, but she was like the kid sister that did everything.
Now, wouldn't it?
No, I think so.
Can you just start by giving us like a brief outline of the business and how it came around and how it started and kind of the progress that it's...
Yeah, I came into it when I left school in 1960, but sort of goes back in history. My grandfather came to Worthing in 1905, answering an advertisement for an apprentice jeweller at a jeweller's Gucci's in South Street in Worthing. 4 years later, he opened his own business in Montague Street. He became very friendly and married the daughter of a well-known greengrocers at the time, Feasts and Sons, who were in Montague Street. And he started his own business in Montague Street. He had two sons, my uncle, Harry Presley, and Neville, my father, Reg. They both, in those days, you left school immediately when you were 14, as Harry did, went straight into the business, and Reg followed sort of 2 years later, going into the business then.
So the way the family business has gone has been my grandfather, George Henry, who's GH Presley, my father and uncle, Reg and Harry, Charles, and then my son, Jonathan. So that is how it is carried on, and where it will reside in the next generation, I do not know, but we have quite a lot of grandchildren between us, and who knows.
In 1905, my father joined the company as manager of an ailing builders merchant. So that's where the Bunce family, or Bunce, came into it for the first time. And then my brother Harry, half-brother Harry, joined in 1920. And in 1928, the cycle shop lease ran out, which was owned, the land was owned by Wember Smith. And at that time, Will Wember Smith died. And my father took over the shop and took over the land of the cycle shop.
Andrew Teal, I think that's as far as I know, go back.
And who was he?
He was a carpenter by trade, I would think. because I've got a saw with his initials on it after all these years. And the family there, that was Andrew Chewell. The next one is Ben Chewell, who were Ben Chewell and Sons. The two sons were Reginald and William.
Whereas Montague Street now is the prime sort of shopping street, South Street in those days was the mecca of the town. And in 1935 he bought our current premises, 46 South Street, and opened up the business as it now is continuing there. They ran the two shops for a while, but closed Montague Street. So that traded through the war and carried on trading up until the present day.
Because I joined the company in 1947. Then after 2 years national service in the RAF, I went back to shop. I wasn't prepared after spending 2 years away and any more time going away to another merchant or shop to learn your trade.
The way that it worked was that those 60 men might be on the job. They all were doing separate things. Somebody in a plumber's shop, somebody doing wallpaper, somebody else doing carpentry. They were all in this big complex, but they had their specialities. So that side of it, which we split up actually, and Uncle Reg went into building flats, and my father went into jobbing business, but the jobbing business really just slowly sunk away.
And what was the jobbing business?
Well, anything in the building line.
My father was the next to follow, my grandfather. Unfortunately, he died when he was only 41. And at that stage, I was just 13. And a relative was involved in the business at that time, William Stanley Boland, and he was able to control that and manage until I was able to come into the company. I trained for 2 years in London, 3.5 years in Toronto, Canada, and came back into the business and started there when I was late 21. And I've been there ever since. And still there, working in a sort of a part-time capacity, gently sliding into retirement.
What year were we talking about?
We're talking about the 50s now, when I came out of the army. Because my first job out of the army was building the wine lodge when I got out of the army. But when that finished, I got a job at Snewins as a painter and decorator. And, in Ann Street? In Ann Street, and we used to go there every day. And I can always remember mixing up paints in Trott's house, you know, the old theatrical impresario, mixing up paints in the room, in that room, lead paint. They used to have cans of lead paint, and we'd stir it all up, put the oil with it and the dryers and terps and stuff, mix it up and make a colour, you know, to go off and do the job.
I also joined straight from school. I think it was always thought that I would, you know, at any rate, give it a go. Unlike my brother, I found it, you know, stimulating, interesting.
What was it like as a child, just coming out of school and going into a business that had been around for many years, and then seeing it kind of grow and having to keep it going?
Well, it was fascinating because, I mean, there was so much experience there to learn from. Trade in those days was so different. You know, I mean, now it's high tech and everything. It was very much hands-on. It was a tremendous amount of knowledge required in those days with, you know, older second-hand jewellery. It was quite different.
The family wanted to take on a shop in Brighton, and then they took on another shop in Bognor, and I think my father's line was, this would be a good idea for me to be involved. And I was for a while, but it really wasn't. I'm happy to be involved in it, but not to work in it. Those were not my skills. I'd left that to my brother. I was with one of the big firms in London, and I decided that I probably didn't want to do that. So when I came down here, it was always likely that I might end up at Spoffors because I'd got an invitation to join them, and that's what I did. That was the way things were in those days.
And when was that? What year was that?
76. And the firm then grew over the years, partly naturally and partly by merger, and merged with other firms. And there was, I think, the biggest merger they did was with a Littlehampton firm, and they obviously had great. That was just not very long before I was involved, because I was asked to try and bring the two firms together. They clearly had some trouble in thinking of a name, because they called themselves Spofforth, Hughes, Byrne, West Barrett and Co. And when you have that number of names, the people who weren't named and were in the Co. Anyway, that name didn't last for very long, but it was about the most long-winded name. There'd been a number in Worthing which had been pretty bad. Green, Wright, Charlton, Annis but that's 4, while the Spofforth, Hughes, Byrne, West Barrett and Co. was 5. Ultimately, it became Spofforth's.
The building you're currently in now, there's a plaque outside.
The plaque outside saying first build, rebuild, 1928, second rebuild, 1984.
That's the one, yes.
When the rebuild took place in 1984, I hurriedly went round and photographed the malt chutes, which from the upstairs down onto the ground. And still to this day, several of the windows have still got the shutters they had to shut off the daylight from the from the grain.
We bought it in 1987, which with hindsight was about the worst time we could have bought it, because that was, I think we took possession of it in the January of 1987. In the October, so 10 months later, was the storm when the chimneys fell through the roof, and all the money we'd spent on refurbishing it was, of course, it was ruined because the rain got in and had to start all over again. And then about, once we got that all back up to spec again, along came the recession in 1990. So not a good time to buy the Burlington. So we sold it, I think, in about 1996, 97, something like that.
You said you have more of a part-time role. Who has more of a...
My son, the 4th generation in the family business. He is there full-time, of course, and as I say, I'm just the backup.
When my son wanted to come into the business, I sent him off to Robert Dyas at the head office at Croydon, and he did a year there, and then came back and joined the company, and he's now the MD since 2000. So, and since then he got the idea of bringing in other shops. I was a little bit sceptical about this, but he went ahead with it, and our first shop was at Steding, and now we've got 5 other shops in the area. So, and they are doing quite well, but they only really do the hardware side, the pots and pans and that sort of thing. But yeah, and they're doing quite well, because they're in a small town, Steding, Lewis, Storrington, Littlehampton and Horsham.
My grandfather worked until, was coming into the shop until he was 88, and my father kept on until he was about 85, and it was only, through ill health that he reluctantly had to give up.
I think our family is unusual because it has, not wholly unusual, there are other firms which have carried on for a very, very long time. I think ours is quite unusual in that it has managed to modernise itself by actually opening a different type of store next door to it. the etc. store selling modern brands, and that was a clever move, and that has enabled the family firm to move with the times, but without moving totally away from its traditional stance. So I think that's one way that it could.
I retired early from it. The trade was changing dramatically, so I sort of came out after 40 odd years. There was a slight interregnum, but then my nephew Jonathan has taken it on and is moving it onwards and upwards.
Attitude has changed to it then. Do you think the attitude towards it has all changed, or? I
think attitudes have changed. I think also that for people who are working, work takes up more time than it did. It's quite interesting listening to people of a generation above me. A friend of mine, his father was a partner in what is still a very large law firm. It was in Brighton, and he would always travel back some way to have lunch at home, in the way that my father always used to travel back to have lunch at home. And I think that sort of thing now would be thought very, very strange, the idea that you'd have an hour and a quarter off for lunch. And some people would have quite long spells off for lunch. I think a number of professional people didn't work very many hours at all, and probably didn't work much between 12:30 and 3. Things have changed, and there's less time for these things.
So your business, did you change your products at all during the years?
Yes, that has changed. Basically, we were builders merchants, ironmongers, and hardware member. Hardware, which is again the old pots and pans and everything that goes with that. Now it's turned round. We sell more hardware than we do builders merchants, only because of all these sheds opening up, selling bowls, basins, everything like that, at a price that we can't get. So yes, it has changed, but we're still managing to keep going, all right.
Has the consumer changed during the years? Has your furniture changed to suit the day now, or?
Oh yes. I mean, the styles have changed, manufacturing methods have changed over the years. So what is sold there today is quite different to what my father would have sold, and quite different to what my grandfather would have sold. But at the end of the day, the principle is still there. You still need lounge furniture, like a settee and a chair to sit on. You would need a wardrobe and a dressing table perhaps to put in the bedroom. You would need a bed to lie on. So those basic things are still there, under a more modern style.